The cold of December was absolute, but the chill that settled in Elara Vance's bones was far deeper than the weather. It was the icy anticipation of a betrayal that had been years in the making, now culminating under the deceptive shimmer of Christmas lights. The prestigious Atheria Institute, a fortress of academic supremacy where fortunes were measured in Nobel prospects, was Elara's current stage and her cage. For 3 years, Elara had played the part of the dedicated, if slightly overwhelmed, fiancé of Julian Thorne, the Institute's golden boy. Julian, heir to the Thorne legacy, a vast empire built on biotech patents and academic endowments, was the sun around which this entire world revolved. Elara, conversely, was the quiet, almost invisible shadow, the research assistant who seemed eternally grateful for her place, forever living in the luminescence of her partner's brilliance. This was the foundation of the lie she had meticulously crafted and endured. The world saw her as a charity case, a bright but underfunded scholar Julian had graciously uplifted. They saw the struggling orphan, raised by a modest academic grant, whose only asset was her tireless dedication to Julian's career. The seasonal setting only amplified the mockery. Atheria, in December, transformed into a winter wonderland of ruthless display. The Thorne family's annual Christmas gala, weeks away, was not a celebration. It was a ritual of power, where alliances were cemented and the weak were tacitly, publicly discarded. Julian's parents, Marcus and Helena Thorne, were the high priests of this ceremony. Their disdain for Elara was a carefully maintained public secret. It was a subtle, constant stream of slights, the casual exclusion from important meetings, the cutting remarks about her humble background disguised as helpful advice, the barely concealed impatience when she spoke at dinner. Julian, always the dutiful son, never intervened. His silence was the loudest betrayal of all. Elara knew the truth they sought to hide. She wasn't just Elara Vance, R.A., she was the sole, albeit reluctant, heiress to the legacy of the Acheron Foundation, a rival biotech behemoth, one that the Thorne family had been trying to silently acquire and dismantle for decades. Her grandfather, the founder, a man fiercely protective of his life's work, had left her everything with a single, complex condition. She had to spend 3 years researching a particular, highly sensitive project without revealing her identity or accessing the Foundation's true resources. This research, coincidentally, required full, unfettered access to Julian's current work on advanced synthetic tissue, a project the Thornes claimed as their own, but which Elara suspected was built on stolen Acheron data. The ring Julian had placed on her finger, a dazzling diamond he insisted he had scrimped and saved for, felt like a shackle, a symbol of the sacrifice she was making to complete her mission. Every whispered slight, every patronizing smile from Helena Thorne was fuel for the fire of her resolve. The current focus of the humiliation was Julian's impending breakthrough. He was scheduled to present his tissue regeneration findings at the annual Atheria Christmas Seminar, an event attended by the world's scientific elite. The narrative was pre-written. Julian Thorne, the prodigy, secures a multi-billion-dollar patent, saving the Thorne family company and cementing his dynasty. Elara's role was to stand quietly beside him, the devoted partner, acknowledging his genius. But Elara was not just his assistant. She was the actual architect of the solution. She had been the one pulling the impossible all-nighters, correcting his fatal flaws in methodology and ensuring the stability of the core algorithm. Julian, brilliant in concept but lazy in execution, had been slowly, systematically taking full credit for her work, confident that little Elara would never dare to challenge him. One particularly frosty December evening, just before the Christmas break, Julian brought home a bottle of vintage champagne. "Celebrate, darling," he'd declared, barely looking up from his notes. "The patent is secured. We did it." Elara looked at him, her expression carefully neutral. "You did it, Julian. I merely organized the data." He gave her a condescending smile. "Exactly. And that organization was crucial. You'll be richly rewarded, of course. My father is preparing a generous research fellowship for you for next year." A research fellowship. A meager pittance compared to the billions he was about to make from her breakthrough. The sting of the insult was almost physically painful. "That's very generous of Marcus," she replied, her voice steady. Julian didn't notice the steel in her tone. He was too busy rehearsing his seminar speech, a masterpiece of self-aggrandizement. He casually mentioned the final detail that cemented Elara's plan. "Oh, by the way, the Thornes will be hosting the annual New Year's Eve ball this year, not the Christmas gala. Too many conflicting schedules. It's a bigger, more lavish event. I want you to look impeccable, Elara. This is where we secure our future. New Year's Eve, the perfect symbolic date for an end and a beginning. The night of absolute culmination, the turning point of time, the grand finale to her 3-year performance." Elara retired to her small, shared study. She opened her encrypted laptop, bypassing 3 layers of Institute security with a few taps. She wasn't looking at tissue regeneration data. She was looking at the financial and legal structure of the Acheron Foundation. She checked the clock. 2 weeks until New Year's Eve. Her grandfather's lawyer had discreetly contacted her months ago, confirming her suspicions. The Thornes hadn't just used stolen data. They had manipulated Acheron's patents to create the very algorithm Julian was about to claim. The Thornes were not just stealing credit. They were attempting corporate espionage on a massive scale. And the proof, the undeniable cryptographic evidence linking Julian's current research to the original Acheron intellectual property, was already secured. Elara opened a hidden folder. Inside, there was a single plain document, her official, authenticated corporate identity. Elara Vance, CEO, Acheron Global Technologies. The date of official transition, January 1st, midnight. She closed the laptop, the screen reflecting the festive lights outside. The world saw a quiet research assistant preparing for a holiday with her triumphant fiancé. They saw a meek victim, grateful for crumbs. They had no idea they were about to be served a spectacular dish of seasonal vengeance, one painstakingly cold and calculated. She walked out and faced Julian, who was smiling smugly. "I'm going out to pick up a few things for the holidays," she said. "I'll be back soon." "Don't be long," he mumbled, already distracted. "I need you to double-check the bibliography." Elara just nodded. She was going out, but not for holiday shopping. She was going to meet the board of directors of Acheron. She was going to finalize the legal blitzkrieg. The bibliography would be the least of Julian's concerns very soon. The stage was set, the year was ending, and the unsuspecting golden boy was about to be burned by the light of the woman he thought he owned. The Christmas hum had become the low, threatening drone of a countdown. The week leading up to Christmas was a gauntlet of calculated cruelty. The Atheria Institute's halls, usually buzzing with the frantic energy of research, now echoed with the forced joviality of the elite. For Elara, the escalating social conflict became the ultimate test of her self-control. Every interaction was a necessary data point, confirming the depth of their arrogance and the satisfying symmetry of the downfall she had engineered. Julian, basking in the pre-seminar buzz, treated her with a new level of possessiveness that bordered on outright ownership. "Stay close, Elara," he would instruct, his arm clamped around her at various faculty gatherings. "People need to see the support system behind the genius. It reflects well on me." He would introduce her not as a fellow scientist, but as his indispensable organizational tool, a phrase Marcus Thorne, his father, had once used, and which Julian had adopted with casual cruelty. At the Thorne family's small, private Christmas Eve dinner, a dinner Elara was grudgingly permitted to attend, the humiliation reached a critical mass. Helena Thorne, Julian's mother, handed Elara a small, neatly wrapped gift. Inside was a high-quality but generic planner, bound in cheap imitation leather. "A little something to keep track of Julian's appointments next year, dear," Helena purred, her eyes glittering with malice. "He'll be so busy with the Nobel circuit. He'll need someone utterly devoted to the mundane details." Marcus Thorne, the patriarch, nodded approvingly, raising his glass of rare vintage Bordeaux. "Dedication, Elara, is its own reward. The ability to serve greatness is a rare talent." He then turned his full attention to Julian, discussing the specifics of the new patent structure, completely omitting Elara from the conversation, as if she were a servant standing silently behind a curtain. The irony was a physical weight in the festive, overly decorated room. They were discussing her life's work, the culmination of years of rigorous, solitary research, and reducing her contribution to note-taking. Elara smiled a tight, perfect smile, accepting the planner with a gracious nod. "It's perfect, Helena. I'll make sure Julian's schedule is flawless." She understood the gift perfectly. It was a physical artifact of her perceived low status, a reminder that in their eyes, she was defined by her servitude, not her intellect. She held onto that planner, the cheap leather cutting into her palm, a talisman of her gathering wrath. Meanwhile, Elara's secret planning intensified. She was working on 3 fronts simultaneously. First, the legal front. Working discreetly with Acheron's top legal team, she had secured an injunction to freeze the core assets related to Julian's patent application. The evidence of IP theft was airtight, documented in a series of time-stamped, cryptographically sealed emails from her private server, detailing the original methodology before Julian had access to it. The final execution of the injunction was scheduled for 12:01 a.m. on January the 1st. Second, the corporate front. She had informed the Acheron board of her transition to CEO. They were ready to initiate a hostile takeover of Thorne Biotech, which had become vulnerable due to Marcus Thorne's reckless leveraging in pursuit of Julian's breakthrough. The timing was engineered to coincide precisely with the public unveiling of Julian's deceit. Third, the public front. This was the most crucial. The vengeance needed to be immediate, public, and irrevocable. It had to happen at the New Year's Eve ball, the Thorne family's largest, most visible event of the year, attended by the very elite who had witnessed her humiliation. The key to the inversion of power lay in Julian's impending betrayal. Elara was not just going to reveal his theft, she was going to expose his heartlessness. She knew his final, calculated move was coming. Julian was not planning to marry her. He was planning to discard her immediately after the New Year's Eve ball, once the patent was officially secured in his name, thereby cutting off any future claim she might make. 2 days after Christmas, Julian confirmed her suspicion with his carelessness. He took a phone call from his lawyer in the next room, leaving his office door slightly ajar. Elara, feigning work on her laptop, listened with clinical detachment. "Yes, I need the prenup agreement annulled immediately after the ball," Julian stated in a low, conspiratorial tone. "No, she signed nothing of value. The ring is a family heirloom, recoverable. I just need her gone cleanly. She served her purpose." The PR spin is simple. He realized they weren't right for each other right after his major professional success. Make sure the statement is ready to release on January 1st. The words struck Elara not with pain, but with a cold sense of vindication. He wasn't just a fraud, he was an emotional vampire. He planned to abandon her on the most symbolic night of the year, humiliating her in front of the entire academic and financial world. That night, Elara prepared the final, physical piece of the puzzle. She meticulously transcribed a complex, encrypted data sequence onto a small, gold-plated USB drive. This drive contained the full, undeniable evidence: the original Acheron IP, the proof of Julian's plagiarism, and the legal documents that would execute the injunction and the corporate takeover. She tucked the drive deep into the lining of the gown she would wear on New Year's Eve, a bespoke crimson velvet dress Julian had insisted she wear, wanting her to look like a fitting accessory for his big night. The final day of the year arrived, shrouded in a flurry of snow and media anticipation for the Grand Thorne New Year's Eve ball. Julian was nervous, not about his fraud, but about the perfection of the evening. He fussed over his cufflinks, his speech, and the guest list. "This is it, Elara," he said, his eyes wild with ambition. "Midnight. The clock strikes 12. Not only do we toast the new year, but we toast the Thorne legacy, secured for generations. My life officially begins tonight." Elara looked at her reflection in the mirror, the crimson velvet hugging her frame, the subtle weight of the hidden USB drive a reassuring pressure. She was no longer the quiet research assistant. She was the executioner. "I agree, Julian," she said, her voice smooth, low, and laced with an intensity he entirely missed. "Midnight is when everything changes. It's when your life officially begins. And mine resumes." He kissed her perfunctorily on the cheek. "Good girl. Now, double-check that the champagne list is correct. I can't have any slip-ups tonight." Elara nodded. No slip-ups. She had ensured the evening would be perfectly, devastatingly flawless for the moment of inversion. The humiliation had reached its zenith. The planning was complete. The stage was set for the midnight strike that would usher in not just a new year, but a new world order, one where the quiet victim stood as the ultimate victor, and the golden boy was left exposed and alone in the rubble of his deceit. The final act was moments away, waiting for the celebratory bell tolls to become the soundtrack of ruin. The Thorne New Year's Eve ball was not merely a party. It was an affirmation of untouchable wealth and academic dominance. Held in the grand crystal-draped ballroom of the Atheria Institute's founders' wing, the atmosphere was thick with the perfume of power and the glitter of expensive deception. Elara moved through the crowd, a vision in crimson, Julian's hand a hot, insistent weight on the small of her back. The air hummed with anticipation, the countdown to midnight ticking audibly in the background music. Julian was performing magnificently. He was the center of every conversation, receiving congratulatory murmurs about his revolutionary breakthrough. Marcus and Helena Thorne hovered nearby, their smiles tight and triumphant, occasionally directing icy glances at Elara, a silent promise of her impending dismissal. They were waiting for the clock to strike 12, for the patent to be legally secured, and for Julian to finally be unshackled from his humble fiancé. At 11:45, Julian led Elara onto the elevated stage where the Institute's directors and major benefactors were gathering for the final toast. He held the microphone, his face flushed with arrogance. Friends, colleagues, and family. Julian's voice boomed, cutting through the jazz. This year has been historic. Tonight, we celebrate not just a new calendar year, but a new era for science, for the Thorne family legacy, and for the advancement of human potential. He paused, pulling Elara slightly forward, forcing her into the spotlight. The moment she had rehearsed 1,000 times was finally upon her. "And, of course," Julian continued, his tone shifting into one of practiced, patronizing warmth, "I must thank the woman who stood by my side, Elara Vance. Her dedication, her organization, her tireless support in the lab has been, well, helpful. She showed us all that even the most modest beginnings can lead to a supporting role in greatness." The crowd offered polite, restrained applause for a well-trained accessory. Helena Thorne beamed. Marcus raised his glass, clearly expecting Julian to dismiss her immediately and deliver his final triumphant speech on the patent. But Julian had one more, self-serving flourish planned. "Now, as the clock winds down," Julian announced, his voice suddenly sharp, betraying the scripted nature of the moment, "I must make a personal announcement. While I deeply value Elara's commitment to my career, I must now focus entirely on the future of Thorne Biotech and the global responsibility that comes with this monumental breakthrough. Therefore, with a heavy heart, I must admit that our engagement, our personal trajectory, must end here tonight. I wish Elara all the best in her future endeavors. A ripple of shock went through the crowd, quickly followed by the knowing nods of the elite. The inevitable, clean cut. Julian had publicly discarded her, mere moments before the new year, humiliating her on the grandest stage of her life. He pulled the engagement ring, the symbol of her 3-year sacrifice, off her finger and placed it back into his pocket with a chilling lack of emotion. The atmosphere was electric with discomfort and silent judgment directed at Elara. She stood utterly still, her expression unreadable, a single figure of crimson stillness against the golden backdrop of the Thornes' triumph. Julian turned back to the crowd, ready to launch into his final fraudulent speech about his patent. But before he could utter another word, Elara took a step forward, retrieving the microphone with a movement so deliberate and calm that it commanded absolute silence. The only sound left was the rapid tick-tock of the grandfather clock near the stage, counting down the last 60 seconds of the year. Her voice, when it came, was not the meek, grateful murmur they expected. It was clear, authoritative, and utterly devoid of fear. "I appreciate the efficiency, Julian," Elara stated, her English suddenly polished, articulate, and carrying the weight of executive authority. "But I fear you have miscalculated the precise beginning and end of this transaction." Julian frowned, annoyed by her refusal to exit gracefully. "Elara, don't make a scene." "A scene?" "Hardly. I am simply delivering the final data presentation," she countered, and the shift in her persona, the change from quiet mouse to commanding presence, was so absolute it seized the room's attention. She reached into the lining of her crimson dress and retrieved the gold-plated USB drive. She inserted it into the Institute's main projector system, which Julian was about to use. A single word flashed onto the enormous screen behind them, dwarfing the Thorne logo: Acheron. The name hit the room like a physical shockwave. Acheron Global Technologies, the company the Thornes had been secretly trying to dismantle. Elara continued, her voice gaining momentum, a narrator delivering the final devastating chapter. "For 3 years, I was asked to organize data. I did so meticulously. I organized Julian's stolen research. I organized the proof of patent infringement. And I organized the precise timing of the ensuing legal and corporate fallout." Julian was pale, his eyes wide with rising terror. "What are you doing? That's privileged information." "It was privileged information, Julian. Now it is public record," Elara corrected him. "The research you claimed tonight, the algorithm you have secured a patent for, is the sole intellectual property of the Acheron Foundation, based on data stolen and manipulated by your father, Marcus Thorne, over 2 decades. The screen shifted, displaying cryptographic proof of IP ownership, followed by the immediate legal consequences. As of 12 minutes ago, an injunction was filed by Acheron Global Technologies, freezing all assets related to this fraudulent patent, Elara announced, leveling her gaze at Marcus Thorne, who suddenly looked frail and utterly exposed. "And as for the modest beginnings I came from, I did not come from a struggling grant. I came from the sole heir position of the Acheron Foundation. I was operating under my grandfather's specific directive to expose corporate espionage from within." She held up the cheap imitation leather planner Helena Thorne had given her for Christmas. "This, Helena, was a thoughtful gift. It allowed me to keep track of the final paperwork for the complete and total hostile takeover of Thorne Biotech, which commenced precisely 30 seconds ago. The Thorne legacy, as you toasted, is not secured. It is now a subsidiary of Acheron Global." The grandfather clock began its final deep tolls. Bong, bong, bong. The sound was deafening, marking the end of the year and the end of the Thorne dynasty. Elara turned to Julian, who was now trembling, his face slick with sweat. "You abandoned me on New Year's Eve, Julian. But your family," she concluded, her voice a razor-sharp whisper of finality. "They served the entire revenge themselves. They gave me the motive, the access, and the timeline." The clock struck midnight. Bong! The crowd erupted not in cheers, but in a chaotic, horrified murmur. Elara Vance, the meek research assistant, stood alone on the stage, the newly installed CEO of Acheron Global, having wiped the Thorne family's legacy clean off the map in the span of 30 seconds. The inversion was complete. The victim had triumphed. The crimson dress of the accessory now looked like the regal uniform of a queen. She tucked the USB drive into the pocket of the cheap planner and walked off the stage, leaving Julian and his devastated family standing in the blinding, silent glow of the truth. The champagne flutes were still raised, but the toast was curdled into ash. The new year had begun, and Elara had officially reclaimed everything.